We are filming today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive in the Catskills, and it's my pleasure to have trumpeter, arranger, composer, and educator Lyle Rusty Dedrick. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure, very much so.
You're in upstate New York, raised, actually a long line of jazz musicians came from between.
Yes, yeah, that's true, that's true.
A lot of them.
Yes.
When you were, let's say, 10, can you recall what the pop music of the day was like, and did it have an effect on you?
To some extent, yes. Everyone in my family had, although I grew up on a farm, a little dairy farm outside of Buffalo, everyone in the family played an instrument. My father played the trombone, not the best, but the loudest ever, you know, in the country bands.
Yeah.
And I used to love to go and listen to the Saturday night concerts and stuff. That's where I kindled my earliest interest. And as far as the pop music, well, I think we had a couple of sheets of music. My mother played piano and violin. My brother Art, who is better known, played the trombone way back. And I remember a song that we had a song copy of. I'm a dreamer, aren't we all? Just a dreamer, aren't we all? And on and on. That's
right.
That would date it, you know, pinpoint the date.
Sure.
And excuse my voice.
Well, it's curious because a lot of those tunes, maybe not that one.
No.
Some of those tunes became jazz standards later on.
Right.
I never knew why Body and Soul.
Yeah.
And not
well, Body and Soul was not yet on the scene.
Right. This is pre-Body and Soul. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So you had a musical kind of upbringing in your house.
Oh, yes. We had the, quote, Dedrick Family Orchestra, unquote. We played, you know, it was fun.
Right.
Yeah.
And your brother took after your father's instrument.
Yes, right. And Art, well, he, during the 50s, had when the polio thing happened.
Oh.
He became wheelchair bound. So he had to leave. He had worked with some bands, Vaughan Monroe, and he had he utilized now for the first time his Fredonia degree, and started teaching in Delavan High School, which is my alma mater. Mm-hmm. And from then, he realized at that point that there was a dearth of music for the dance band, they call it in those days. Later they call it the stage band and all that. And he started writing music for his own band, and then he started merchandising it via the mail, and then it grew and grew into Kendor Music.
Right.
And which is pretty well known internationally now.
Yeah. And he thought that there was a market for students to play at that time.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
He had a lot of foresight, yeah.
Now, when he went to Fredonia and when you went to Fredonia, was jazz allowed?
It was allowed in a limited way, I guess, but it wasn't part of the curriculum, of course.
Right.
Nothing to do with the school itself. But I should mention, too, that my brother's roommate at Fredonia was Lester Chappell, and the two of them were the founders of Kendor. In fact, Chappie was 1 year younger than Art, and in his senior year, I was a freshman, so I became his roommate there.
Why did you choose the trumpet?
Well, my first instrument was the upright alto horn, because it was available in the family. It was in the house, you know. And I didn't dig it, man. You know, pa, 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 pa. And I wanted to play the trumpet, and I saved my pennies, and my first trumpet I bought for $35 and got into it then. And then I played trumpet in the high school band.
Yeah.
And then the way my interests broadened, I was walking down the street in Buffalo as a teenager, you know, in the 30s, and I heard this sound of this trumpet, and I couldn't believe it. And I pushed through the crowd to follow the sound. And the source was a crank-up recording machine. A young lady was playing the old 78s, and I said, oh, what's the name of that? I thought it was a radio, but she said, I said, what's the name of that orchestra? She didn't know. She took it off and looked at it. She said, that's Louis Armstrong. I said, I'd like to buy that, and I did. And there you go.
There you go.
That started the whole thing. I mean, and when I played the record at home, my whole family, who knew nothing of jazz, loved it. That's how he could communicate.
I guess so.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard that story before.
Yeah,
he certainly had a large effect.
Yes.
So your family was, when you said playing in a country band.
Town band.
Town band.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're playing the Sousa.
Yes.
In the marches,
right.
in
yeah.
the summer concerts,
exactly.
and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. They're still around, but that was a big part of the community at those days, wasn't
that was on the scene at the time. Part of the social fabric of.
Right.
Was great.
Was your family affected at all by the Depression?
Yes, but I didn't feel it. I mean, being on a farm where you knew you had a roof and food on the table and all that, of course it was affected to a great degree, but I wasn't really aware of it.
Yeah, because you were a young...
Yeah, I was a teenager.
10 or 12 or...
Yeah, yes, preteen, yeah. Right.
So kind of just after maybe reading later, you said, well, I lived through that.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, my wife was a bit younger, she doesn't recall the Depression, and we joke about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Louis Armstrong enters your life and...
Changed my life.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Were you curious as to what is it that he's doing?
What is what?
What is it that he is doing? Is he reading this music? I mean,
Louis?
Yeah. I mean, how did your thought process go to try to figure out what it was that was so great about
it?
him?
I really didn't try to intellectualize it at all. I just knew I heard that sound, and it carried so much emotion and expression and everything that it just flipped me out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next big guy was this guy, Bunny Berg, and he was actually, Louis once said, when asked who his favorite trumpet player was, my boy is Bunny. And I know why, because Bunny was actually an outgrowth of Louis. Bunny used to say, when you go on the road, all you need is a toothbrush and some Louis records. Bunny was doing studio work in New York long before I ever came near New York City, and of course, he had a program called the Saturday Night Swing Session. Leith Stevens was the CBS conductor, and they featured Bunny. And he opened, this is long before he recorded I Can't Get Started, which was 1936. He opened that show with the pickups, I've flown around the world, so forth. Yeah. And I heard that, and that was another thing, Yeah. I'd like to talk just as, I know there is time limitation, but briefly about a friend from the hills there. He lived in Springville, New York. His name is Bill Simon. He lives in Florida. Bill Simon later came to New York, but not as a professional musician as I did, but as a writer. He wrote for Downbeat in the early stages. Then he became the Record of the Month producer for Reader's Digest. And when we were kids, literally high school kids, we had a little band, he and I and a couple of others. And we played Saturday night at Morton's Corners in a place where the dances were half round and half square. We were at the round, thank God. And the job started at a certain time, but I would not leave my house until Bunny's show was over. Then I would go to the job,
Well, I guess I at least could time you. They knew when you were going to arrive anyway, because Bunny played his last note.
That's right.
When you said the dances were half round and half square, and you played the round part?
Yeah, well, with the square dances with the callers and the fiddle and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
But what kind of music were you playing?
Oh, we played just songs, East of the Sun, West of the Moon, or something, whatever the songs of the day.
Right.
And Billy and I used to always argue. I liked Louis, he liked Bix. Well, I liked Louis and Bonnie, of course. But his boy was Bix, and we traded records back and forth, and it took me a while to really appreciate Bix Beiderbecke. Later, yes, but at that time, Louis is so straight ahead, that was for me. But
yeah. He can really grab you.
Yeah.
Bix is a little more subtle.
Yes, right.
When was your first attempt, or how did you get into improvising?
Well, it's hard to believe, right? But I played songs. I'd hear a song on the radio and start to play it, and then noodle around with it, as they say. And I guess just early ad-libbing. I had no formal instruction. And actually in Fredonia, I was only there a little over a year, and the harmony that I was introduced to was not help in this field.
Right.
It was just from listening.
Yeah. Playing what your ear told you. Would work. But you went on to. What year were you at Fredonia?
37. The year 37, 38.
So it became pretty clear to you shortly after that you wanted to get out and play.
Yes, right.
And was this fellow Dick Stabile?
Yeah, Dick Stabile. There was a trumpet player from Buffalo by the name of Joe Gustafaro who was with Dick, was leaving the band, and of course the news got around. And my brother drove me to Pittsburgh to in essence, audition. All I did was, Dick said, "What do you want to play?" And I said, "Confession." I played chorus of Confession. He said, "You're all right, but you can't." I was playing cornet. He said, "You can't play this. You got to get a trumpet." We drove clear back to Buffalo to a music store, got me a trumpet, went back to Pittsburgh, and I joined that band. And that's how, through that band, when we were working in Cleveland, Red Norvo's band came, Mr. and Mrs. Swing came in to work the theater. And we're living at the Allerton Hotel in Cleveland. I used to hang out in the lobby with the guys from Red's band. I loved that band, Dick's band was, So I had the opportunity to join Red soon. After that, that was a change in my life too, because that guy, learning process. I learned more music from that band, from him. He gave me the opportunity to write. I didn't write, I knew the scale and chords and progressions maybe, but he would pay minimally, I underline, but so he'd pay me something to write arrangements for the band. And the arranger, pre-Rusty Dedrick, was Eddie Sauter.
Oh.
Yeah. And Eddie had left the band. He had played third trumpet with the band in Rowe. And he's one of my great idols, He had a lot of...
So you had something to shoot for, too, to follow him as an arranger.
Right.
Was there a certain process of writing something and hearing it?
That's it. That's exactly it, yes. That's where Red afforded me that opportunity to be able to write something, hear it played, and then, make some adjustments and so forth. Yeah, that was priceless.
You can't have a better opportunity than that.
No.
Right.
And as a teacher, we talk occasionally on the phone. He's not well. He's had a stroke and he's incapacitated and he lives in California. But I said, you were my teacher. He does, he doesn't,
Right.
I love him,
The swing era was pretty much at its height, right about there.
Yeah,
And,
right.
You guys traveled around mostly by bus or car?
Cars and buses and trains occasionally. you know, but that was a little more costly. And Red was never, you know, into the money end, you know, unfortunately. Yeah.
You weren't able to set a lot aside for your retirement, right?
No.
Who would have been thinking about it at that time anyway?
Yeah, right. Who cared, you know? I just wanted to play.
Yeah, I'm playing.
And, you know, my trumpet mate was Conrad Gozzo. We were kids together, teenagers, you know, and sitting and playing with him all the time. What more could you ask for, you know?
There's actually a little quote from this book, Inside the Big Bands, by the fellow Simon.
George Simon.
George Simon. He says, Red came back with another 10-piece band in the spring of 1940. This one featured two brilliant young trumpeters, Conrad Gozzo and Rusty Dedrick. He then says it produced the same sort of soft, subtle swing that his 1936 group had. And he went on to say that it may have been a little too subtle for what was going on.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, you know, it didn't hit you over the head at all, you know. You know, that's why he never was able to get into the big money, I guess. But musically, it was great. Yeah.
Would you play mostly dances?
Yes, some concerts, but mostly, yeah, one-nighters, you know, college dates, and then hotels like there used to be the Ben, I don't know if they exist today, but Ben Franklin Hotel in Philadelphia, Mulebach Hotel in Kansas City. Red and I were talking about that the other day. The hotel had pillars with all mirrors all over, you know. Yeah, we're laughing about that. Yeah.
What did your parents think of this?
They didn't envision me as a traveling musician, that's for sure. They wanted me to be a farmer.
Yeah.
And my brother Art, they wanted to be a Methodist minister, and they failed. We failed him.
You say, Mom and Dad, you had the instruments there, so
yeah, that was your fault.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
Did you like being on the road?
I loved parts of it, you know. And when I first left home with the Dick Stabile scene there, I was so homesick, you know, but then I outgrew it, you know. And you got to be buddies with the guys you work with, you know, and they're like a family. You know, I roomed with Conrad for 2.5 years. We left Red Norvo's band to go with Claude Thornhill's band. We left together, and then when we left, several other, the Barry Galbraith and Ted Goddard and a few others from that great little band left. Actually, we broke up the band, which, you know, for the moment, Red didn't like us too well.
Right.
And we were left with Claude because Claude was going into Glen Island, and he was getting, the Shribman office was giving him the same build-up they gave. They didn't have the same result, but Glenn Miller.
Boy, I've heard that name a lot. Shribman.
Yes, Cy Shribman, and he had a brother. I can't seem to think of his first name. Yeah, they were big in the New England area. Yeah.
So if they got behind your big band, you had a decent chance of...
Yeah, airtime. They were carrying microphones up to the stage all the time, you know. So and we recorded for Columbia. That was the beginning of, you know, Claude's getting really into some kind of a public recognition.
It's hard to envision, I think, for the young people today, with that the rock and roll bands that tour and so forth today and record, that what you guys were doing, that was the scene.
Yes.
That the swing bands were like the rock and roll bands of today. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. Well, when we would work theaters, like you worked the Paramount Theater, you would have like fans standing at the stage door for autographs and stuff. In that sense, it was. There were parallels, you know.
Yeah. Did you continue writing for all the bands you were?
Then with Claude, of course, was great writer himself. And then Gil Evans joined the band. And but still, Claude, give me a free hand, you know. And he paid more money too. He was more appreciative of the effort that goes into making an arrangement. yeah. Then Red.
Copied all the parts yourself?
Oh, yeah, sure, right. Yeah.
And not at a computer either.
No, no, not at all.
In fact, I was going to ask you what the average salary of a sideman was in those years.
With Red, it was like a low figure, and you were lucky to get it. And not that he, you know, it was a financial problem that he could not cope with. There was an old trick, and I shouldn't take too much time on this, but if you worked a week here and then had 2 days off, they changed the payday, you know, to conform to the next. And now after, with Claude, he had more backing and everything. That was not it. But the salary pre-war, I would say, ran like $150, something like that a week. Yeah. For some, like we had Irving Fazola and Nick Fatul and later Irv
Cutler.
Cutler, right? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, great players. You know? Yeah. Working for, you know, at one point, Billy Butterfield was getting his 802 card. So it was Conrad Gozzo and I, and Billy came in, played third trumpet while he was getting his 802 card. And in doing an interview on WKCR, they looked at the personnel on different days, and they said, "You sure that was a trumpet section?" It was. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, the union was very strong at that time, wasn't it?
Yeah, right.
What was the minimum age you had to be?
It wasn't a matter of age, at least for me. I had to wait 6 months to get my card. You know, I left Claude because I was married and my wife was pregnant, and I didn't want to travel anymore. You know, I stayed in New York. Yeah.
So you got into Ray McKinley.
Yeah. Well, that was after the war, and I thank Red Norvo for that. Willard Alexander was backing Ray McKinley in a band. Eddie Sauter was the musical director, really. He wrote the charts and rehearsed the band and everything. But Ray was a wonderful guy and, you know, good player and everything. And he fronted the band when he couldn't, had another drummer. He was a great guy to work for. And
was this the Glenn Miller band that he was fronting?
No,
or was it his own band?
It was his own.
Okay.
But he had been in the Miller band, you know, overseas.
Right.
And in fact, when Glenn was lost at sea, Ray became the leader of the Glenn Miller Air Force band.
Right.
Yeah.
What did the war years bring for you personally, as far as your...
Disaster. No. But here again, I have to thank Red Norvo for so many things. We were standing at a bar. The Forest Bar used to be a hangout for musicians in New York. I was still with Claude Thornhill, but Red and I were standing at the bar on like maybe a Monday night or something, and I was about to be drafted, and he said, John Mezzi, who had played saxophone with him, he played with Harry James, Raymond Scott, and everything, but he played with Red Norvo. John Mezzi is in a band out in Mitchell Field, Long Island, and the band is in the stage of formation. They weren't up to what they call TO, Table of Organization. They were looking for more players. Wow. He said, "Why don't you call John Mezzi?" And I did. And I got a letter from the commanding officer of the base, so that when I went to Whitehall Street to enlist, you know, brave, you know, I enlisted because I knew where I was going, you know. I had this letter in my hand, and after that, it takes all day. You're walking around with naked, you know, and you finally go up to through a line up to a desk where there's this, and I didn't know a sergeant from a general. Sergeant sitting there, and he's reading a name and saying Fort Dix, another name and saying Fort Dix, and he got to me, and he said, "Dedrick," and he started. I said, "Excuse me." I handed him this letter.
Wow.
Well, that thanks to Red Norvo, that got me at Mitchell Field. Yeah.
So you spent the military years playing?
Not all.
Not all of it.
Because they started breaking up. This was the Air Force band, an Air Force band. They started disbanding them and reclassifying. And I was reclassified as a carpenter and sent out to Kearns ORD, which stands for overseas replacement depot outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. And I was ready to go on a shipping list to the Pacific as a carpenter when the bomb fell. And within 2 weeks, because I had so much time to my credit, within 2 weeks I was on my way home.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
what a close call.
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Young men at that time, that was just what you did.
Yeah.
You went in the service.
Yeah, sure.
You know.
Right. There was no other
Right.
thing. Yeah.
The
Right.
only deferment was just physical.
4F, if you're 4F.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, see, at that time we were all, now Gozzo, 2 or 3 guys from Claw's band got into the Artie Shaw Navy band, and they didn't have it easy. They were, you know, in the Pacific, being shot at, you know.
Oh.
You know, so, but they survived. And,
Yeah.
yeah. What a reunion when he joined Woody's band right after he got out of the Navy, and I joined this McKinley band, and we were working the Commodore Hotel, and they came in town to play the Paramount. Their band finished early. They all came over where we were. What a reunion.
I guess.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
We should have that on film.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, after World War II, what happened to swing in your estimation?
Well,
The big band era.
there's so many theories about this, you know, the demise of the big band and everything. I think largely economic, because it cost some money. And then the beboppers came along, and with a smaller group, probably, you know, lower overhead, and they played some such interesting things that you can't fault it, you know. But I think that did contribute to the demise of the big band. I don't know. There are many theories.
Yeah.
Everybody's got their own. Yeah.
Because that the audience didn't understand what the bop players were doing so much, or they couldn't dance to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
you mean
part of it, I
yeah,
guess.
I think so. Well, yeah, that is one of the theories, that it killed the business in that respect. I don't know, you know.
I guess
Another thing, excuse me, another thing that was a contributing factor was the recording strike and the singers. I mean, singers became the thing. I love Frank Sinatra, but I mean, he didn't help the big. In a way, he helped, but in a way, he killed the big bands, because singers became so popular, and they're, you know, that they didn't need a band except to go in the studio and record or something, you know, or do a show.
Yeah, it didn't necessarily depend on who was backing them up.
No,
it was just a nameless orchestra.
You get a good arranger who is a good conductor, and you go and record, or you do a concert at Carnegie Hall or something. You know, they didn't have a road band. You know? Yeah.
So how were you able to carve out your own niche in New York City after?
Okay, I got a name that it's the name #1 on your list of honorees on the paper you sent me.
Oh, no kidding.
Dick Hyman?
Yeah.
Yeah. Dick Hyman and I became friends, and he well, that's how I did my very first recording under my own name. He took me on a day to play behind a singer, you know. I don't even think I had anything written down. He just says, play it, you know, and then play a solo for 8 bars here or something. That was Esoteric Records. They were, too. So we did the date, and they asked me to do a date under my own name, and that was a 10-inch LP in the early 50s, you know. But then we became such friends that he had me on his dates and vice versa, and he's such a talent, you know, and such a wonderful person, you know. Gee, that was a turning point, as far as I'm concerned, in my opening some doors, you know, into the jazz field and the commercial recording studio field and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been involved in some very interesting projects.
Yeah.
You know,
What a talent. Jeez. Great.
It's like all he has to do is decide he wants to play some kind of thing, and
Yeah,
he can do it.
it all. Yeah, yeah.
So the studio scene became pretty healthy
Yeah.
in those years.
Yeah.
In New York.
Right. Yes. Well, there are 3 networks with the major, even they had symphony orchestra and a commercial band, of 25 or so on staff, and then that all died. Why? I don't really know, but it died. It's like the business in the Catskill Mountains. It used to be a thriving thing, and then it died. I can't, really understand.
When you got a call to do a recording or a studio date, did you necessarily know who it was going to be for or what the music was going to be like?
No. I know there was an exception to that. I used to do, Enoch Light had a record. He had 2 or 3 different record companies, and he was doing these recreations of band hits, so-called. And they wanted to do, okay, get started. And the date was on a Monday morning at 10 a.m. and hadn't played over the weekend or anything. And they did call me, the record company, and said, Dick has written, he wrote out all the notes. I don't need them, I knew them, but he said he wants you to play I Can't Get Started. That was not the one that's on this record. Okay. That was like an actual recreation of the original. He wrote the chart exactly note for note, and I played the solo note for note. But they said, this is 10 o'clock, we don't want you to come in without chops, so we want to let you know what you're up against, Yeah. So, but most of the time you didn't know. You go in, sit down, and then hand out some charts.
Are there things that stick out in your memory as great sessions or terrible? That's always a hard question.
Yeah, it is.
You do so many of them.
There's, I won't say great or not so great, but somewhat interesting in some respects. You know the name Connie Francis?
Sure.
Okay. We used to do her dates, and the contractor is now in Nashville, Danny Davis. He has the Nashville Brass. Yeah. Well, he was a friend of mine. He used to put me on all our dates, and we go into the studio in the evening, and the trumpet players, there were 3 trumpets, Charlie Shavers and I, and Al DeRisi, both deceased, unfortunately, but they handed out the first chart, no trumpet parts. They had trombone parts. I know Irby was sitting in front with the trombones, and she was in the booth, singing to Irby Green, play it this way, no trumpet parts. So we sat and handed out the second tune, no trumpet parts. Charlie said, let's go get a taste. So we went out the back elevator, went across to the White Rose Bar, and had a taste, came back, and Danny was at the head of the elevator, fuming, when I need you, you're not here. Well, he was right, so that I wouldn't say that was memorable for any, special reason other than that,
A learning experience.
Right.
Wow. And a lot of these records that you played on, your name was probably never listed.
Most. Hundreds, literally hundreds. And then when they did list them, they would, list the name only. And there's Eric Goldberg is a local musician here who was a fanatic about collecting records, Hundreds of records he has. And he said, I see your name on so many records. He said, you were the busiest 4th trumpet player in New York. Well, there's a reason for that. Most of the really good players would come in, like, say they're a platform with 4 chairs for the trumpets,
Yeah.
If it's Doc Severinsen or Bernie Glow or anything, they wouldn't go in and automatically sit in the middle, they would, like Jimmy Maxwell. I remember going on a date once, and Jimmy Maxwell's already there, warmed up, sitting on the end. I said, Jimmy, you're in my seat. You know?
Oh.
He says, well, I'd rather be asked to move up than to be asked to move down, you know.
That's curious.
Yeah, well, see, it's the opposite of the other philosophy where a lot of guys want to grab the first part, you know. The really good players didn't want to necessarily, you know, they did it when they had to, because they had to, but that was as far as it went, you know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any idea of how many recordings you played on?
Not really. I have a lot. I have a lot that I played on, and I have at least maybe a dozen albums that I had done the arranging and so-called leading on, which are under my own name. Some of them more of a feature thing like this, or some of them. I did a lot of recordings of this record company was interested in doing mostly songwriters. I never really knew much about songwriters or cared much until working for this record company, Monmouth Evergreen Records. We did three 12-inch LPs of Irving Berlin things on the occasion of his 80th birthday, so you can see how far back it was. And we did Harold Arlen and quite a few others, but those were, in a sense, commercial, although they were jazz-oriented. They had singers and stuff, you know, and I did the charts and did playing and stuff. And so there are a lot of those kind of things, too, as well as just going unrecognized, or whatever the word.
Yeah.
And just going in and sitting.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I have a list out of one of the jazz recording books, and it has your 8 or 9 recordings between 55 and 65. Those were good.
Yeah, oh yeah,
years for
right.
you.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
Right.
Rhythm and Winds on Esoteric. That was your first recording.
That's the very first.
Yeah. Well, it says here a mint condition copy is worth $100.
I have one copy. Does it say that?
It does
really?
say that, yeah. I'll show it to you.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Dick was on it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do anything without him.
Right.
And you know, it was that kind of a relationship that was...
How did your association with Don Elliott come about?
Well, Riverside Records was a very well-respected jazz label, like Keynote. There were others that go way back, and I recorded for Keynote under my own name, and they went bankrupt. Well, Riverside didn't go bankrupt, and Dick had a call to do something for them, and it was his concept. And he said he'd like to do, that was that thing called counterpoint for 6 valves. He'd like to do that, and he wrote up some little duets. And he picked me and Don Elliott to be the players. And the rhythm section was known at that time as the NBC rhythm section because they were all on staff. That was Mondell Lowe, Dick Hyman, Don Lamond, and Eddie Safransky. And we just went in and played them, and that was kind of well received critically, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a good record.
Did you get any kind of, I'm not sure the word, from the number of records sold? Did that make a difference for you, or you were just paid from the beginning?
Play the flat union scale. Yeah. Royalty, you're thinking.
Right,
yeah.
yes.
No. No.
So, from a financial standpoint, you had a family and so forth. Was it tough to make a living in New York, or were there a series of years that it was tougher than others?
It was very tough when I first arrived and got my 802 card. I didn't know anybody. I came off the road from playing with name bands. Who cares? You know, in New York. And little by little, I got to know some people and gradually worked my way, opened a few doors. And there again, Dick Hyman was most instrumental in that process.
Did you ever need to work a non-music job?
No.
Well, that's saying something.
Oh, I never did. Yeah. I worked a lot of jobs that weren't music in the strict sense.
That were musical?
Yeah, musical, but not,
Yeah.
you know, disassociated from the so-called business.
Right.
No.
Well, I would imagine in being in your position that you took a lot of different kinds of work.
I took anything.
Bar
because,
mitzvahs and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Took anything. Sure. I worked with Shep Fields. I got my 3 months in. And for 3 months, you're not allowed to do anything in New York to get your card. 3 months on your transfer. The next 3 months, you're allowed to work with permission. And I had some friends from the Army who were working with Shep Fields' band. I had never, you know, played that, you know, Ricky Tick kind of, he called it rippling rhythm.
Oh, yeah.
And they were holding auditions. He was reorganizing his rippling rhythm band. They were holding auditions at NOLA Studios in New York. And so my friend said, why don't you come on up? So what would I audition for? The hot seat, right? The jazz pick, right? Which was nothing, of course. He didn't like me at all.
Oh.
But he said, while you're here, he said, why don't you play the first book, you know? And that was the book that had in the Harmon mute, you know, and the bubbles going up and down, and the accordion and everything. Perfect. So that's what I did until I got my 6 months in.
I see.
I worked in, and I didn't dislike it in the sense that he knew what he wanted. I didn't have to like what he wanted. He knew what he wanted, and he knew how to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
there you go.
It, yeah.
What didn't he like about your hot playing? Do you know? Was it maybe too modern for him, or?
Oh, I don't know. I guess it wasn't Ricky Tick enough, you know. So, so he X'd that right away.
But he'll put you in the middle seat. You're okay
yes,
there.
Okay, that's exactly what happened. Yeah.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you had a whole other part of your career that in educational field. Of course, with the arranging, but also at Manhattan.
Yeah, I like that. I started there in 70 and left in 80 because I became 62 and I was eligible for Social Security. And I thought, oh boy, this is going to be great, you know. So I left the job, and I've regretted it many times because it had a lot of advantages having that job. One of them was prior to 1970, I used to have rehearsal bands because I would like to write, and I had some great players like Arnie Lawrence and on, you know, in my rehearsal bands, and I didn't have that need there because I had my own bands to play, and that was an experience, educational experience for me, because I could write anything I want, bring it in the next day, and play it. You know, it was good.
Wow. What did your duties involve?
At school?
Yeah.
Well, I taught 3 or 4 ensembles, but I used to call it the concert jazz band was the A band, sort of. Yeah. Then there was a B band and a couple of smaller groups. And I taught jazz history and appreciation courses, and I liked it. It was good. Some of the players that came out of there are still doing, you know, they're doing great.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
You have any feeling about what the state of jazz education today?
I have a lot of opinions on it. I wrote an article once for an educational publication called The Instrumentalist. They asked me to write an article about jazz improvisation, and I think I went a little overboard. I said that because of my experience in school, where I heard so many young players come in who knew their axes. They could play up a storm, they knew their changes, and they could run up and down the changes, but they didn't say anything, you know. Some of them did, but most of them didn't, you know. And that's what I based that article on, and I said they should listen to Louis, in essence, and first. Yeah. Now, you know, then learn the changes. Oh, you know, fine. But,
well, you're not the only one who has said similar things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's in a sense it's nice that education and that has embraced jazz and it's become an art form.
Yeah. Right.
But on the other hand, I'm not sure that it only belongs in the concert hall. You know, that we could use those dancing days in the club scene again.
Yes, right. I agree.
But things change, don't they?
Yes, and sometimes irreversibly, you know.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law's widow is married to Hoagie Carmichael's stepson. Clear as mud, right? But so we share that. I loved Hoagie Carmichael. He wrote so many great things, and he never got, I think, the commercial recognition. I mean, Stardust, of course, you know, but so many other tunes that nobody, a lot of people don't know about, you know.
Yeah. He went all the way back to the Bix days, too.
Yeah, he and Bix were like friends.
Yeah.
You know, those must have been great days. I'm a little young for that.
Right. I think so.
I know. I don't remember, you know, many people from that period, but I'll bet there were some great characters, you know. Yeah. I knew some of the, like Al Galladora and some of the people from that Whiteman band later on I got to know in New York. Charlie Margulis was the first trumpet player, Bix. Charlie Margulis said Bix was terrible. He says, well, maybe Bix wasn't a great section player, you know. Yeah. Charlie was a magnificent trumpet player, technically, you know, wonderful. And another parallel example to that, there was a trumpet player in New York by the name of Benny Baker who played first trumpet under Toscanini, right? And everybody was studying from him at one time. And Doc Emerson used to take his lesson ahead of me. He'd be in there playing those A2s like he owned them, and I'd go in and struggle. But the point of this whole thing is that Benny Baker also did commercial work as well as playing first trumpet in the orchestra. And so he'd do radios. It was radio in those days. And they would give him section players like Bunny was on staff at CBS. He said, Bunny was terrible.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Depends on your outlook, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Yeah.
Point of view. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you've written arrangements for Maxine Sullivan.
Yeah. I love
some
her.
other singers, Lee Wiley.
She's wonderful. Wonderful. We had lunch with Dick Hyman's wife a couple of years ago at the Mohonk Mountain House or something.
Mohonk.
Mohonk. Yes. They came up there and called and said, could we come over for lunch? And Dick had to leave to go. He was working on another Woody Allen thing, you know. So I didn't get to see him that time, but we had lunch with Julia. Wait a minute, what am I lost my...
Well, we were talking about Lee Wiley and some of the singers.
Oh, yes. Yeah. She said she and Dick were driving down whatever it is in Paris, and I won't
try to pronounce it.
Yeah, no. And they had the radio on, and they were playing the not the Lee Wiley, the other you mentioned, Maxine Sullivan thing, and she said, "You were the star of that day." Well, that's just nice to say.
Yeah.
You know. But there was only one trumpet, you know, and we played. And I played behind her, and it was fun. Those were musically pleasant. You asked what were some memories of pleasant ones. Those were some of them. The Lee Wiley, it was at the end of her days, you know, and she wrote me the nicest note later thanking me, but she had been a real giant of a singer, you know, and she was insecure. And Don Lamont, come on, you're great, come on, don't be, you know, encouraging her. And she sang well. I had 3 horns to work with. Buddy Morrow played trombone, and Johnny Mintz, the 3 horns. usually the same rhythm section. Dick and Milt and you know,
Yeah.
I think Bucky was on it. You know, those were pleasant. Yeah.
Those fellas played on a few records too, didn't they?
I don't know. You could never count the number of records they played on. You know, geez.
How about personal collections? Have you saved a lot of scores or?
I saved the scores from the Harold Arlen album because I'm proud of the writing I did for that. That led to something, by the way. I got to know John Lewis at school because he was on the board of trustees, and when he was the mentor of the American Jazz Orchestra, and they did the concerts at Cooper Union. They did a concert based upon Harold Arlen and Claude Thornhill, so who was a better natural, you know, and he hired me to conduct, rehearse and conduct. They had the orchestra was every big name in the city, you know, Randy Brecker and on and on, and that was a pleasant thing too, yeah. But, I liked what I wrote for the Harold Arlen album, even though it's not a jazz album. When John called me, I said, "That's not a jazz album." He said, "We want the tunes because we're doing Harold Arlen." So,
how long did you get in a studio to record the typical album?
well, the normal date is a 3-hour date. You know, usually you would do. I think like for this, we did 4 days. I'm not sure. You know, they give you a little extra date or something. You know.
Yeah, appreciate that. Do you write at the piano when you write?
I have no keyboard facility, but I have an old Wurlitzer electric piano, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It was just perfect for me. I can go over and hit a chord or something and say yes or say no or something. But I haven't gotten into, you know, the computer stage, which everybody else. I have a nephew up in Canada who was, he's such a talent. He writes for CBS, Columbia, Canadian Broadcasting, I guess CBC they call it. And he uses all the new devices, you know, and he's encouraging me to try to get into that. I don't know.
I don't know. There's something nice about taking a pencil and putting down what's up here.
Yeah.
Do you get a chance to play much these days?
No. Very, very little. I worked the hotels, and this you didn't know, and now you will know. I worked here. Yeah. Because a couple of reasons. A good friend of mine and a wonderful saxophone player, Milty Hissler, was working here, and the band we played a show. That's all, and except for a dance set at the beginning and maybe a couple tunes at the end or something. But that was the reason I got started over here. Then one Labor Day, the leader came down from Charles Slutsky's office, who owns all this, and he said, "No more horns." Well, that was it. We had 3 or 4 horns like that. I don't know if you know Roswell Rudd. You're going to meet him later. Anyway, if you're not, Roswell and I and the saxophone player got X'd, and they have never had horns since then. What used to be a band with some horns and another band in the lounge over there, a trio, no more. Just now the show band itself is bass, drums, and piano. Now that's pretty much a typical development up here, you know.
Yeah, it's a shame.
Yeah, it is.
It's much like, I think for a different reason, but the pit bands that tour with musicals now have shrunk a lot because of electronics.
Yeah, sure.
But,
they have that in the pit, and it replaced so many live, or at least ostensibly live musicians.
Yes, we hope they're alive.
Yeah, right.
Did you bring some other things here you wanted to?
These are kind of notes that I thought would refresh my memory in case I needed it, but I don't think I do. The one thing I wanted to allude to was the fact that with Red Norvo, I was playing a book by Eddie Sauter. Then I left one with Claude. I was playing a book by Gil Evidence. Then after the war, I would join Ray McKinley playing Eddie Sauter's book. Then I left Ray, go back with Claude like it was going home, home. And it was back to Gil Evans. And you know that, I played those books, I knew it was great, but I never really appreciated it.
Till later.
Such giants writers, you know.
Well, especially being a writer yourself,
Yeah.
you can appreciate
Oh boy.
the
Yeah.
lines
Yeah.
and you know,
Yes,
how they
yes,
used
yes.
instruments. And
Yes. Gil used to say, I'm not a composer. Well, he was, but he said, I'm not a composer. He said, Eddie's a composer. He said, I'm an orchestrator. He said, Eddie could use, he didn't use this expression precisely, but Eddie could use help with his orchestrating. He thought Eddie could improve upon his colors and combinations and everything. He said, but Eddie is a composer. I'm not. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I guess.
Not necessarily factual, but
Right.
yeah. That's about, I guess, all.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, this has been fascinating conversation,
Wonderful.
and I really appreciate you coming down here.
I appreciate your having me.
I know that your saxophone work too has gotten around, as we can see from this this program in Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting.
That was recorded at Modern Art Suite by the New York Saxophone Quartet. And Ray Beckenstein's sort of the leader of that group. Wonderful group of players.
Did your years in the big bands help you figure out what saxophones should and shouldn't do, or what you could write for them?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, having heard the instrument so many years by some of the great players, you know. Yes. I have some brass quintets that are published, and one is in the process right now. I call it In a Pentatonic Mood. And if you ever notice the pickups to Sentimental Mood, Dukes, it's a pentatonic scale.
Yeah.
So those 5 notes are the same, and then it's altogether different, you know. But that's the way I
Good
tie
lead-in.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. On behalf of the college, I'd like to thank you for being here today. And
Again, thank you for having me.
okay, thanks a lot.
Right.